We're going to start with vocals because vocals are the trickiest thing to get right. All right. So let's start with it flat. You hit the reset. Where do you reset all? Here we go. All right. Really muffled. You get those pops too.
And you get the high frequency S too.
We can. So the first thing I do is I roll up the low cut or the high pass filter. On male vocals, I'll go to anywhere between like 125. John's got a really nice, low baritone voice. So, 125 to 150. That's where I'll go on this.
Can you show me exactly how you got there?
So when you hit home, it takes you to this with all these different tabs. So you can either hit view on the EQ or the high pass filter, right? This is the input. If you hit view, this will take you to the EQ.
What's the other way to do it?
So this view is the preamp and the configuration. So if you need phantom power, if you need to flip the polarity, you can do some other stuff with it too.
Another thing you see that has the tabs up top, there's some arrows here.
Yep.
You can always just filter through with the arrows up here as well.
So I like the view button because I'm going to be touching this stuff right here, so it helps me. The first thing that I do on a vocal is I go ahead and cut 250 hertz. All right, you want to hit spacebar a couple times for me, Jordan? Oh man, I gotta turn on
the next track.
So this is your low cut here.
Essentially, you can adjust it in here, or you can adjust it from here.
Yeah.
It's just a little easier with.
So where you see low, mid, high. 1 would be your low, 2 is your low mid, 3 is your high mid, and 4 is your high. And so what he's doing is he's setting a frequency. He's adjusting the gain up or down. So if you do it down, it's going to compress. It's going to eliminate that frequency.
Cut that.
Cut that, exactly. And then you move it up, it's going to basically enhance it. I don't know what the...
Right, it's boosting it. So everything we're doing in live sound, other than reverb and delay, is turning it up and turning it down. If you can kind of wrap your head around, like, I'm just turning it up and turning it down. EQ, the fader is turning it all up and turning it all down. EQ is taking part of the frequency spectrum. So to the high frequencies up there, we can select the different parts of those frequency ranges to turn just that up or down. So I can turn down the low part and leave everything else intact. And in general, I will most often, there are exceptions, cut before I boost. So I'm pushing up a signal and I'm listening for what's in the way or what's making this bad. And then I'm going to attenuate or cut that. I'm going to take that down in volume and try to find that frequency range that's cluttering it up, that's covering it, that's making it painful, so that what's left is the good stuff. You're not trying to shape a signal and boost, well, I want more of this, so I'm going to boost it up. Well, I want more of this, so I boost it up. It's all there. You just have to cut out the stuff that shouldn't be there. Is everybody following so far?
Yep.
Mm-hmm. So the low cut is rolling off everything below that point, and it's rolling it off a lot. So it's going down 12 dB per octave. So then, if it's set at 150, an octave below that is 75 hertz. It's turning it down 12 dB at 75 hertz. An octave below that is 38 something. It's turning it down another 12 dB there. So it's going way down the further down it goes with the high pass filter. So that's a good way to cut a lot of low end because you don't need rumble from everything. Does that make sense? So the high pass filter is your friend. If you had like 5 minutes to set up and you had to start with a clean console, just going through and setting your high pass filters in the right spots could totally help you get your mix almost there because of just rolling off all the mud that's cluttering it up. Ready to keep going? Mm-hmm. All right. Thank you, calendar. Yes, I know I'm doing the CBC training.
And there is none
So let's take it out.
like you, Jesus.
Now we put it back
I
in.
know that your eyes are like flames
So this
of
turns it on and
fire.
off.
I know
Yep.
it's
Oh.
your
I
head.
didn't realize that.
I know it's your voice.
So
that sounds
this
like
cut at 250 hertz, we can take it in and out by bypassing the EQ.
I know that your
So
eyes are
as you
like
practice
flames
and
of
play with
fire.
this,
I know
learn
it's
what
your
these
head.
frequencies sound like when they're not cut and then when they are cut. So then when you hear something, even if you've cut there or near there, you'd be like, I think I need to cut some more. Because sometimes you've got it cut, but it just needs to go further.
Jesus, you're beautiful.
Okay.
The next frequency that I go to on vocals is around 500.
Jesus, you're
And on this, it's got the RTA graphs. You can see where those frequencies are popping up. Now, just because it's popping up doesn't mean that it's bad. That's the note they're singing, or that's, like part of the natural tone of it. It just might be one of the places that's coming out a little bit.
Just the voices. Jesus, you're beautiful. Jesus, you're beautiful.
So if I reset this,
Jesus, you're beautiful.
then I can cut it again.
Jesus, you're beautiful.
Hear how it cleans it up a little bit more.
Jesus, you're beautiful.
500 is,
Can I turn it off?
yeah.
Jesus, you're beautiful.
Or we can just turn off that frequency by hitting reset, and then to turn it back on. Well, why is it doing that? Yep, there it goes. Oh, you can toggle it. Very nice. So you hit spacebar a couple times for me. Thank you. Maybe one more time. Might have gone fast. So this frequency.
And there is none like you.
So 500 can be a covered sound that doesn't necessarily sound muddy, and you'll definitely hear it when you have a higher female vocal. So if you've got a soprano singing, you're like, I cut 250, why does it still sound covered? Cut 500 or so, give it a 100 hertz on either side. That'll start to clean it up.
I know that your eyes are like flames of fire. I know it's your head.
So the next place I go is around 2K. So when we're talking about high mids, I'm gonna not shout over this. We've kind of addressed the lower octave around 250, a middle, low mid octave, region around 500. The 1K to 4K region are the kind of pain and nasally sections. So 1K, now don't do this when you're EQing stuff, but it can be helpful to understand what that frequency sounds like when you're just practicing. You can boost a frequency to see what it sounds like. So if we go to 1K, this is going to sound really nasally. So
This is on John, who has like a really low. He's not real nasally.
So we can take it up an octave. If we go to 4K, here's a pro tip. Between like 3 and 4K is where your ear canal itself resonates, kind of like a tube.
That's where my daughter's, when she screams, it must be that.
Exactly, yes.
It's like we're like, I'm not really joking, like that's where you're like, ah.
Yes.
Yeah, cool.
If it hurts, go to 3.15K. That is the resonant frequency of your ear canal-ish. People are different. But that, if it's hurting, go there and cut that. You can cut it really narrow. If you have an old rock or electric guitar player that's brought in his PV amp and he's playing Kansas tunes, it might have a lot of that because that's where you lose your hearing first. So they're trying to boost those frequencies back up to make it sound, like
you used to.
like when they were young. But for everybody else, it's really painful. So going there first can be like, all right, let's be safe. Cut 3K on your old rocker electric guitar player. So if 1K is nasally and 4K is piercing, like shoving an ice pick in your ear, 2K is kind of a combination of piercing and nasally. So, let's play this again.
This weekend church is going to be no 1 through 4K. Take it out.
All right, hang on.
So one thing you did I've never done before is you made the window more narrow. You do that
Yep,
with
this
the-
is called the bandwidth.
Okay.
And so you can choose how many frequencies or how far out you
Okay.
boost or cut.
I've never messed with that.
Yeah, in general, when you cut, you can cut very narrow and cut quite a bit and get away with it.
How did you make it wider?
The Q function. Q is some mathematical thing that has to do with like octaves on either side or something. I don't know, it's too nerdy for me. So Q, is narrow. So if you're gonna cut, you can get away with cutting really narrow and not really hear it.
Jesus, so beautiful.
We use that a lot on Pastor's mic because there's just certain.
Right. And when things are ringing with feedback, you can use a very narrow Q to try to notch just that frequency that's feeding back.
Okay.
When you're boosting, which there are times to boost, you tend to want to boost a wider. It's going to sound more natural if your boost is wider. So cut narrow, boost wide. So if we go
Jesus, you're beautiful.
2K,
Jesus, you're beautiful. Jesus, you're beautiful. And there is no.
so that's, nasally and piercing. This is piercing.
Jesus,
Hear how it's even whistling some,
and I know that you
right? So those are where you can go to try to fine tune and cut, right? I know John well enough that around 2.5K is going to be a good place to cut for him.
Jesus, you're beautiful. I know that your eyes are like flames of fire. I know.
And
All right,
again,
Cyprian, go up there and start singing.
so that's a safety thing. Is this 2 to 4K is like, just look out, because when people really go for it and really sing loud, that's just naturally going to get more loud and piercing. And you could call it God's design or evolution or whatever, I don't care. But when someone is in trouble and really raising their voice and really going for it, it's getting louder at the frequencies that our ears are more attuned to, right? So it makes sense, like survival, God wants us to not call out and not be heard, so our voices get louder when we get louder at those frequencies that we're more sensitive to. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Jesus, you're beautiful.
So the other thing about John is his voice in the different registers that he sings in, the tone changes. So you got to kind of watch out for that. Does anybody have any questions about EQ so far? Making sense?
Obviously, the cut is below that line, and the boost is what goes above that
Right.
line.
So on your EQ display, this line in the middle here is 0 dB or no change, right? We haven't boosted it, we haven't cut it. Where you see the yellow is the change away from 0. Everybody following?
And now,
Awesome.
now, what is the chart based out of? That's just dBs. You're cutting 5 dBs out of that frequency, or what's the 5, 10, 15 stand for?
5 is the how many decibels you're cutting or boosting. So those are the numbers going up and down on the graph. And then the numbers down on the x-axis. Whoa, algebra nerd.
Yep. That's their frequency.
That's the frequency, and they go in octaves. So who took piano lessons or guitar lessons? Anybody? Nothing?
Be proud.
So a note down here, we perceive it as the same note when the frequency doubles. Those two notes we perceive as the same because their frequencies are either doubling or halving of each other. And so our hearing can go down from 20 hertz, which is like that low rumble when there's a truck outside your house. And you're like, what is that? Up to like 20K, which is up above like when you turn on the old tube TVs and you hear that. What is that? So that's 20. So your range of hearing is really far between the different frequencies that you can hear. So we break that down into octaves. I think it's 10 octaves. I can't remember. So you'll see here, I've got a cut around 250 and I've got a cut around 500. That's kind of how things tend to work, is if you've got a resonance in one frequency, you might have a resonance in the octave above that as
You
well.
might need to explain what resonance is.
Resonance are the sounds that that tend to build up.
Build up, yeah.
Or you could call feedback a resonance, where that frequency is resonating between the speaker and the microphone, and that's creating that feedback loop, and that level's going up and getting bigger.
Certain frequencies that tend to have more tendencies to have that resonance occur.
Or more intensity over time. It could be a thing where, like you've noticed how the rooms tends to resonate at a certain like low frequency. So if you emphasize one frequency, and then if you cut it, the room would still kind of be vibrating or resonating at that frequency. And certain inputs will have that as well. And that's what we're trying to cut out, are those things that are resonating in a way that's covering up something else, or it's making it sound unpleasant.
So we were at high mid.
So high mids, I don't typically EQ the highs on a vocal. Here's why.
Okay.
If you've got a singer that's singing through a mic that has those nice high airy frequencies, and he might be on this one, you can hear it on the vowel sounds on there, like breathiness. And it's either there because the mic can pick it up, or it's not because it's a dynamic mic and it just doesn't really do those frequencies that well. So it's either there or it's not. However, the S's can be a problem and jump out, especially after you compress. We'll talk about compression in a minute. It'll be an overview because it'll probably be at the overload point in your brain and what you can pick up for a single evening, which is not uncommon, and so that's why I make videos so people can go back and watch it. There is a de-esser. So in the effects rack,
Are you serious?
Yes. There is a, what can I take out? Yes. Okay, this is not in anything. So I'm going to change its type to a dual de-esser. Now we can, this is a little bit fancy. I can set the effects to the one.
connect that, boom. Now we have a unit that is looking only at the S's to turn those down when they're too loud. So if you didn't have a de-esser, which the church that I've been mixing at sometimes on Sundays, their console does not have a de-esser, and it makes me a little grumpy.
Is this dynamic where it'll?
It's dynamic.
That's
So
cool.
only
it's a
as the
de-esser. Dynamic de-esser. Right?
It leaves the air on the vocals, that nice feeling you get on the vocals. If you didn't have that, you could come over here and turn down the S's. So you would change the shape maybe, and get a little bit more fine tune on where those S's are and pull them down. The S's and SH sounds are going to be anywhere from like 4K to 10K.
So Carol, Pastor Carol, huge S comes through. So anytime she comes in, I always go right to the high and try to hone in on that frequency and cut that. Now, my answer
Thank
is
you.
a de-esser.
God bless you for that. If you had a de-esser patched in on it, that would grab those S's and just turn down the S's when they're too loud. It wouldn't make it sound like there's something over the microphone because you're trying to cut those S's and get them down far enough. It would still have that open, airy feeling,
That's awesome.
but without the S's coming on and punching you in the
Can we
face.
just add that to everything? All the mics? I mean, not to all the mics?
Let's see.
I
we
don't
have
know of a reason why we wouldn't, right?
4, 5, 6. We have 8, and we could. We could.
I'll never have to worry about an S again.
Well, yes and no.
So you basically turn it up to see how much you're turning, like turning this up higher is essentially lowering the well, we haven't talked about threshold. It's basically saying I want to get rid of more of these S's sooner, right? So I'm going to start grabbing them at lower levels the more that I turn this up. Does that make sense?
Changes the curve.
Changes the threshold if we're going to be
Right. Yeah.
precise, but I don't think we're precise yet. So de-esser is your friend. I'll see if we can patch these in and save them on the base channel, and then I'll show you how to get to them so that they can be there.
There's a
and
lot
ready
of
to
other
go.
stuff in there that, I mean, if we have room for it, but
Right, I mean, you're not using 3 delay units,
no.
you know, or 3 reverb units and a delay, and precision limiters, maybe.
Yeah.
But I don't know where those are, I haven't dug around to figure out where that's going. Cool.
That's
Anybody got any questions so far? EQ starting to make sense. We're turning up and turning down different parts of the frequency range.
Do you have since we're on EQ, it's not, I don't know if it really falls into the EQ realm. It's more in the dynamics realm.
Okay.
So that's another thing I've kind of, when it gets echoey,
Mm-hmm.
I've kind of tried to mess with to see if I could kind of fix that in the room, with the holds and the releases and the
Mhm.
attacks. Obviously, we use the compression a lot. Compression's been my go-to on like Pastor Allen. He'll go really low. He'll go super high. So I
Right.
like to compress him a lot. Even Cyprian, I'll compress some, right? Because as a singer, you're very dynamic with your highs and lows.
And
so-
singers are going to be dynamic.
and I
if you're
can't
gonna
constantly
mix-
be going
Oh.
up and down with it.
Your
so-
digital compressor, right?
yeah. So
Yes. Mixing without compression is like, especially if you have vocals and a lot of vocals. You know,
Mhm.
coming from IHOP where we have at least four vocalists all the time. So, yes, I love vocal compression. So let's talk about an overview of what compression is doing in the parameters, and then kind of how to apply it, how to know when you've gone too far. You know, like, we're not going to get in the nitty-gritty details. I do have videos for that, but let's get the basics down so that you can understand what it's doing. All right, faders, we're turning it up and down. EQ, we're turning it up and down in frequency ranges. Dynamics, we are letting a signal processor turn it down at certain times based on how we set it. Okay? So we're applying a ratio. Everybody remember ratios? You know, like if chocolate comes through my house at a 4-to-1 ratio, 4 chocolates come in, only 1 chocolate makes it out, right? That's what a ratio does on our compressor. As we set the ratio here, that's going to show us, let me change something on another page so that it's easier to see. That's the wrong one. Okay, make it easier to see. The ratio is how much we're letting out, or, sorry. If we have a 2-to-1 ratio, above our threshold, which backing up a little bit more, we're going to have a threshold control. That's going to basically divide the signal into 2 areas based on level. Below the threshold, we're not touching it. You're like, that's, you know, it's not my business. I'm not doing anything below the threshold. Once it gets to the threshold, above that, we start applying the compression, right? We start applying change to the overall level on how it's moving, or how much is coming out on the backside of the processor. So we have a signal that's before the compressor, and we have the signal that's after the compressor. So that's what we're looking at. If we set our threshold all the way down, anytime we get any signal and we apply a 2-to-1 ratio, for every 2 dB of additional input, we only get 1 dB of additional output. So if it goes up 10 dB, we're only going to get 5 more dB out on the other side. Does that make sense so far? So that 5 dB that we turned it down, right? It came in 10 dB. It's only coming out 5 dB. We've reduced the gain, or we have gain reduction of 5 dB. Let me use some different numbers to see, to make it a little different. If we have a 4-to-1 ratio and it comes in 12 dB above the threshold, our output has only gone up 3 dB above the threshold. We've reduced the gain by 9 dB. Does that make sense? So the gain reduction that you're seeing on this right here, that's how much you're turning it down with your compressor. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so those are a direct 1-for-1 with dB.
Yep, these are decibel measurements. So we don't usually start with our threshold all the way down here. There are times you can do that, but for the most part, we want to leave most of it alone until we get those peaks, those things that jump out and kind of want to reach out and grab you. Those are the things that we're trying to turn down with our compression. So a good starting place for compression, the kind of middle of the road ratio, is 4-to-1. If you go a much higher than 4-to-1, if you go to 10-to-1 or 20-to-1, that's called a limiter. So basically, if you have 10 more dB of input and you only get 1 more out, that's quite a squashing, right? We're not letting much out past that point.
No dynamics.
And there's times to use that. There's times when you don't want it to grab most of it, but you just want it to grab that top little bit. Then you can use the compression as a limiter by setting your ratio that high.
At that point, you're moving the threshold, right?
The threshold at that point is going to be really high, so you're just grabbing a little bit and only briefly.
And just so you guys know that this will highlight in red and it will show you how much you're compressing or what the threshold is. So it would say if I'm compressing that by 8 dB, you'd see the red line going all the way to 8. So you know if you're really compressing them or not.
So if it's doing anything for you.
Yeah.
So
So the ratio, with the 4-to-1,
Yeah, so that
Is
right
it-
there is your ratio. So the curve there, so right now he's at a ratio of 10-to-1. And that's why it's
Okay.
really almost flat.
oh, this is always 2-1.
So if you go here, this is a ratio of 4-to-1 right
Okay,
now.
Gotcha.
So that's what
Okay.
tells you what the ratio is.
Gotcha.
now the other cool thing about this compressor is it's showing you the little dot, the little blue square. That's showing you where the signal is and then where it is on the curve, right? So you can see when it drops down below there, the compressor isn't doing anything. As it goes up and up, you can see how it's going across that line in a way where we're seeing the ratio being applied. Okay?
Yeah, this board's really, really nice when you're doing EQ and dynamics because the visualization is awesome.
Yeah.
Our last board, it was
What visualization?
Yeah, there was none. And me coming in knowing nothing about sound, never playing a musical instrument, I mean, trying to do EQ is almost impossible.
Yeah.
Where does the threshold usually start out on vocals?
That's a good question.
It
It
does
depends on the input level coming in.
Yeah.
So a good rule of thumb, if you don't really know what you're doing with it, is 5-6 dB of compression on average is pretty good for a vocal.
So one thing I would do, like when they're practicing, right? We come in early when they practice, and we kind of get the board set up and get it honed in and stuff. You can start playing with some of the EQ and dynamics, and this little blue dot will give you an idea when Cyprian's up there singing of where he's sitting at, right? And then that's where you can start picking where your threshold is.
Well, and one thing that we haven't been using that we should probably, now that you guys are getting some training, you come in every week and you're like, okay, I've got to set up my levels and stuff like that. But really, you guys could have your own mixes saved on there, so that way you've got mostly the same band, so you've got most of your stuff set, and you can make those small adjustments week to week as you're honing it in a little bit. Because right now we just have the one threshold one.
Yeah.
I think we have
I'm sure it's not the way Terry set it up initially.
we
I'm
have
sure someone's-
we have actually Terry's set in there still.
It's still a base.
It's not. We need to go back to it.
We haven't reset it in probably a few months.
Well, so a part of it is we had to change a lot of stuff, so it's wrong. Like it's not set up channels ourselves.
All right.
So that was the other thing.
So a good bass scene will get you an idea of what the general parameters are, and then learning how to dial in, how to adjust to what you're hearing.
So, going back to dynamics and my initial question with the attack, hold, release, can you explain how those work?
Yeah. So the attack is how quickly or slowly the compressor is going to respond to increases of input when you're above the threshold. So drums, for example, they have a very fast transient, right? If you look at the waveform of a drum, it's there and then it's gone, right? So if your attack is set too slowly, your compressor will respond, but it'll respond after the drum's already gotten loud and quiet again. If you set it very fast on a transient, it's going to grab that initial right when it comes up. So if you set it at 0 or 1 millisecond, I don't know if it'll go all the way down to 0. Will it go all the way down to 0?
Yep.
Yep. If you set it at that, it's going to respond immediately and push down everything. Now that doesn't always sound really natural, right? So the tone actually changes with the attack time. Now, you don't have to understand exactly why it does, but in general, a slower attack time is going to be thicker, while a faster attack time is going to be thinner. I can show you on a snare drum here in a minute. Do you want to do that? Let's look at this. All right. So let's take this up. Well, let's listen to what the snare drum sounds like without compression, right? Let's just bypass.
There it is.
I'll do a little bit of EQ just so we can get in the ballpark. All right. If we set our attack super fast, hear how the initial attack goes away. As I slow down the attack time, hear how we get that thwack back. And it's in this region here to about 20 milliseconds. Between 7 and 20, we can adjust the tone. So let me compress it too much so that you're hearing all the effects of that. So this is what I would consider a faster attack on a snare. Here it feels like you got a thicker stick that he's hitting it with, right?
It's the side a little bit, yeah.
So this can be your tone control as well as level control. That's part of what the attack is doing on that signal.
So when the attack, it sounds thicker when the attack is lower?
Slower.
Okay.
So let's hear it on the kick drum. It's always a fun one. So let's set it really fast. And let me...
So what would you do first? Would you bring, like if something was too loud, would you start in the EQ and bring it down and then go here?
I EQ first and then compress.
Okay.
You don't always have to compress. If you can fix it with EQ, try that first. If the compressor is looking at a bunch of wonky signal levels or like frequencies that are out of balance, it's going to behave funny and not very musically. If you've got it EQ'd well and then compress it, then it's looking at a signal, okay, there's a nice signal to compress. I can adjust the tone dynamically a lot better because I'm not worrying about all that floppy, woofy, cardboardy sounds or whatever is coming through it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
To this. So, no compression. Now I'm going to turn it on and with the 0 attack time. So there's no punch left.
It went from this big to this big.
We're still hearing it happen, but there's no more punch. As we slow down this attack time, we're getting punch again. If we turn it off, so we can choose whether or not we want to compress it to get more punch out of it or not. So it's not in right now. You have to make it active.
Yeah, make it active. Yeah. You ever use the exponential on the ratio? Or the yeah, maybe it's exponential.
It's called an expander.
Expander, okay.
So the expander, instead of turning down the output, is turning down when it's below the threshold, like a gate.
I didn't follow, I'm sorry.
Yep. So you can see in the graph here, above the threshold, it's at 1 to 1. Whatever's coming in above the threshold is going out exactly. It's turning it down when it's below the threshold.
Why would you
To
want to
cut
do
out
that?
the low sounds.
In case it's rumbling, or you got bleed from something else, right? You can use that on toms or on the snare drum if you've got tons of everything coming through the snare drum except the snare, right? And so it only opens up when that signal comes up above that threshold. So that's why you would use an expander or downward expander, which is similar to the gate, but
That's not why we have sometimes the buzz sound, is it? You might not notice it when everything's playing, but you know there's that bzzz.
that's an electrical thing.
That's from the lights. We know about that.
But a gate could be used to when there's nobody, like when the bass player isn't playing, right? And his signal goes down. You can have it so that when his signal goes down and just the buzz is there, you have the threshold just above that buzz. So that when it's just the buzz, it turns it down.
That's a good point. Because we do have that with the bass.
I never actually thought about doing that. It's a good idea.
All right.
What was the other thing that was buzzing on me the other day?
And tracks.
It was tracks that was
Yeah.
buzzing on me, yeah. That's what it was.
One thing you can try if you've got a hum, is you can try to hit the ground lift switch on a DI. So have you heard of ground loop? You know what I'm talking about? It's a low buzz at like 60 hertz, so the same frequency that power comes in on, that can get transferred over to audio cables and make this, but it's this low rumble with it. Sometimes hitting the ground lift on a DI can make that go
What's
away.
the
The DI is the box that takes it from a 1/4 inch output, like your keyboards and acoustic guitars have, or a bass, and turns it into a signal that's mic level, or that can go a long run all the way back to the console.
So
That little box that the 1/4 inch plugs into.
Is that
the
what's
neck-
over there in the back under the thing?
Yeah, both the acoustic and
it's changing your voltage level, or
found it.
It changes the impedance,
okay.
and it takes it from unbalanced to balanced, and it isolates it with a transformer.
Okay.
So it uses a transformer to change the impedance from high impedance to low impedance.
Mm-hmm.
Low impedance can go a longer distance without picking up more noise.
So
But-
I'll just give you guys a heads up. This is whenever the lights are set halfway. That's where you're gonna hear it. When they're all the way up, not so bad. But so some of those moments where they bring down the lights.
You'll hear it more.
And they bring up the buzz.
That's where we have to deal with that situation.
Cool.
So you're saying that's what the DI does, is change it from a high impedance to a low impedance? Or, and then the ground, you said,
The ground lift, sometimes there can be a ground loop between electrical components. So it happens if like a piece of gear over here is powered from a different circuit than a piece of gear over here. And I don't understand all the electrical engineering behind it, but there can be a buzz that comes into the system when there's like a mismatch. So sometimes lifting the ground, right? The electricity wants to go to ground, right? That's kind of its home. So when you lift that ground, it's not looping through and coming around in the system there with that audio cable. It's just going straight to ground someplace
So
else.
how do you lift the ground?
There's a little button on it. Let's go look.
Was that or is this mine?
I have
This one actually has a ground lift.
All right, here we go. So if we're going to talk about the release is how quickly the compressor will recover from reducing the gain, or how quickly it responds to the signal when the signal level itself drops, right? So if a signal comes in and it pushes down on the signal, right? How quickly it comes down on that is the attack time. But how quickly it will respond when the signal level goes back up, that's the release time. So the release times in general are much faster or much slower than attack times, right? Release times could be in the 25 or 50 milliseconds range for a fast release time. I say 250 milliseconds is a good, like, middle of the road release time, where, maybe 600 to, 1.2 seconds could be a slower release time. In essence, you want the release time to let the signal recover in a musical way. So, for a drum, right? What do we got selected? The kick drum? Push up the kick drum. So if we have the release really slow, essentially we're turning up that really long end of the rumble as the release time slowly recovers. So it hits and vibrates some, but essentially, like, we're turning up the tail end of that because our release time is slow. This is on a transient, right? They kind of behave different than other signal levels. If we have it super fast, it's going to come right back up after it pushes down. It's not going to wait very long before it's all the way up. On drums, I tend to have it about 50 milliseconds.
What about vocals?
Vocals, I go about 250 milliseconds. So let's go back here.
Beautiful, I know that your eyes are like flames of fire. I know that your head is white as wool. I know that your voice, it sounds like waters. Jesus, Jesus, you're beautiful. Jesus, know that your eyes are like flames of fire. I know it's your head. I know it's your voice, it sounds like waters. Jesus, you're beautiful.
Now, if you have somebody that's speaking or singing more quickly, say we get a bunch of rappers in here, you're going to want that release time to go faster because you're going to want to recover as those syllables are coming out. You're still wanting to even them out. If it's too slow, it will even it out generally, but not those short differences of level. If you've got something a lot more legato, like remember that, I can't remember which conference it was, but some lady came in and her daughter sang some like classical piece, really long legato. Those might, you might benefit from a little bit slower release time on that, but 250 is going to be fine for you. It's going to be a good middle of the road setting for when you're getting started.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And again, you're looking for about an average of 5 dB of a compression for a vocal. If they go a lot more into it, you'll start to hear when it sounds kind of squashed. Let's listen to what that sounds like.
As well, I know it's your voice, it sounds like waters. Jesus, Jesus.
You hear how it's pumping? We're getting the noise from the rest of the drums. It kind of sounds small and squashed. Another thing you'll notice is the breaths get louder than the notes, right? It seems like something got flipped on its head. That's when you know it's compressed too much. One other thing that I like on vocals, this is kind of a nerdy thing. If you go to this second layer, you turn up the knee to make the knee soft. It kind of makes a gentler transition. So it kind of eases a gentler ratio in at first, and then into your chosen ratio as they really get into it.
So how did you get to that second?
There's layers. So you come, this is the normal one, this is the second one. Sometimes you'll find other controls on processors by going to a different layer.
So on the dynamics, we have the compress. Is there a boost function on this? If they're
Yeah.
low, it boosts them up?
Well, what compression is doing is turning down the peaks so that you can boost the overall level. Imagine you're trying to, you're packing a moving truck, and the last thing you've got to get in there is your pillow. If you want to preserve all of that space of the pillow, you're not going to fit it in that tiny crack up at the top of the moving truck. You're going to have to squeeze and compress it to get it up there on top, right? So that's kind of what compression is doing. It's reducing the dynamic range so that we can get the overall level higher. After we've turned down the peaks, then we can boost up the entire signal, which makes the lower level signals higher without the louder signals coming out and punching you in the face.
So basically what you're saying is by using the compression, that's how you can boost when they're lower, because it will turn up the
Right,
faders up.
right. If you get into a pinch where you compress it enough, but then you're having to push up the fader too high, the makeup gain, or gain over here, this will boost it after the compression circuit. So after it's reduced the gain, after the threshold's looked at what it wants to do and the ratio's done its thing, then if you boost that up, that's in boosting the entire signal, but after all the compression has done its stuff. If you boosted the gain here, essentially what that's doing is lowering the threshold, because you've increased the signal level. Now essentially the threshold is going to act on what was lower signal levels. But the output gain just helps you get your fader in the right spot after you've compressed it.
Cool.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
When we do compression here, doesn't mess with their in-ears at all?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
I'm pretty certain that what gets to their ears either comes straight off the preamp or right after the high pass filter. One of the two is kind of the standard way to set it up.
So the reason why I'm asking is like the singer is like really like boom boom. It's probably helpful for them to know that. But if
Right.
you're doing it here and they don't realize it, then they won't
Right.
get better.
I've had singers, well, singing is just hard to do, and mixing your own monitors is hard to do too. So I've run into when singers do get compression back into their ears, they'll push really hard because they're like, I'm not feeling it enough. I don't feel like I'm out on top of the mix like I should be. You know, I can't hear myself quite enough. So they'll really push and sing really hard.
It's like a circle.
Right. So you end up chasing your tail.
Okay.
So just out of curiosity, so the bass doesn't have this is the high pass filter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't
So
have it
they call it
implemented.
low cut. It's just not turned on. Do you have
That's
it
because we're not
selected?
even using it. So right now that's the EQ and the bass.
Looks like it has it, unless that's the low frequency that's being cut. Oh, so here's what happened. Over here on the EQ, you can choose different shapes for some of the different bands. Now, not every band can do everything, but on the low one, you can choose a low cut here if you didn't want to use it here. I can surmise a reason why somebody might do that, but it's really not all that. So if you hit mode, that will change
And be
what it
careful
does.
with hitting that mode button during service because it will drastically change the way it sounds. Like
Yeah.
if
Did you do that one time?
yeah. So Pastor Allen's speaking, and you actually hit mode, it changes your EQ drastically, and then all of a sudden he sounds way different. You're like,
Yeah.
oh, what did I just do?
Sounds like the voice of experience. So,
They tell you what not to do.
I mean, that's running sound, is
figure it
figuring out what not to do. So a low shelf, if we take a look at this, a low shelf will turn up all the frequencies and then leave it at that for everything below or above that, you know. So if we move this way high, you can see this becomes a point. We've got this other band doing stuff too. But you can see, you know, it comes up to a certain point and then everything else gets that same amount below that. Same thing if you turn it down. So that's a low shelf. That's good for kind of shaping the tone. It's kind of what you'd have on your hi-fi stereo, is a low shelf or a high shelf, right? If you choose VEQ or PEQ, those are kind of, you know, two sides of the same coin. They're just a little bit different shape in their bell curve. I don't know how often I've heard the difference, or if I've really tried. We've got one that's like vintage, man. It makes it cooler.
I think most of the time we're on PEQ.
Yeah, something like that. So that's again going to be your bell curve, where it looks like a bell, or a peak is the other, peak dip is the other name for it. And then again, if you go up to a higher frequency, you can do the high shelf. There we go, high shelf. So that's going to do the similar thing, but for the high frequencies, everything above it. Or you can do the low pass filter, right? So we've got the high pass filter on the low cut. You could do a low pass filter. So if you've got something that's got a hiss in it or a buzz or something, you can do that. Basically, the only channel that I've ever really done that on is the bass, because you don't really need like a ton of 4K on the bass, you know what I mean? But it can be helpful to clean up either hiss or noise. It can be helpful to, say you've got an acoustic guitar that sounds kind of like cheap and tinny, you can roll that down just a little bit, and that can be helpful too. But those are mostly the only times I've used a low pass filter. Is that making sense? So that's what this is with the modes. And when in doubt, don't tweak during the service. Or at least during a solo. We've got about 15 more minutes. Do we want to take a look at Pastor Allen's mic? That'd be helpful for us to round out the evening.
Yeah, fine with me.
Cyprian, you want to don the apparel?
Batteries?
Yeah.
All right.
Test 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3.
So this is what you're usually running into, right?
This
You're
is,
having to
this
push
is
up.
what we're doing. Doing this, we're doing this, and we're doing
This has
this.
been a great time.
All right.
Just to give you a heads up.
Well, it's been
So
that.
here's what.
Because you look at where our gain's at, right?
Uh huh. So here's what is tripping you up, but you didn't know it. The threshold on the limiter was set too low. So if we can gain this up, and then also, let's ring this out systematically. So Cyprian, it might feedback a little bit, so don't get upset, okay?
That's all right. Go for it.
All right, we're gonna hit reset all. And we're gonna start with the, so now we're starting with clean EQ.
Do we want to? Right now we're on a.
Hello, hello, hello.
We probably want them all on P.
Yeah.
Pastor Allen's gonna preach on Sunday.
So we can gain this up a little bit. We can turn this back down. And
Test, 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 test. Testing, testing. Hello, hello,
it
hello.
actually doesn't sound bad
Test 1, 2, 3.
when it's
4.
Cyprian. Alan just has a different voice, so we'll have to sound check with him on
You
Sunday.
hear a little bit of a feedback right there.
Woo! When it goes higher.
There it is.
There it is. Hello. Pastor Allen gets pretty hyped sometimes.
Yeah, he does.
So we're going to go to those frequencies that we see hanging on the longest. There we go. So now we can go to that frequency.
Low. Test 1, 2.
We can make it real narrow.
In Jesus' name. I feel like I have to hit a podium.
All right, so let's see what comes up next. All right, so there's 6:30.
Test 1, 2, 3.
I'm gonna.
Testing. Testing.
All right,
That
I'm
one
gonna.
was almost 290. 630, 290.
Hallelujah. Praise the Lord. Hallelujah.
So now we can notch this out. Then I'm gonna go to 6:30 on this one.
Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello.
So
Test 1,
Get loud.
Be loud. Ah! I'm Pastor Alan. I'm gonna get high. Woo! Test, 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 test. Hello. Hey, that sounds pretty good. Testing, testing.
all right, so now we're kind of dialed in with Cyprian.
You got it? Test, test, test.
Now, from what I've heard, Pastor Allen, you might take this fourth band that's not doing anything with EQ, and you might go around here to this 1.5 to 2.5K range, somewhere in there, to get that, you know, that kind of sound.
And that one, do you want a little bit more of a cue on there, more of a broad of a range on that one, or do you?
Yeah, if you can't get it with a narrow one, try to make it a little broader.
Yeah. Ooh. Test, 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 test.
So now when we turn it up,
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4.
so that's pretty hot before we get feedback. And when he's got his hand up by his face, that's going to make it worse too.
Oh, my bad.
No, it's
I
fine.
was trying to adjust. Test, 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 test. Hello, hello, hello. Testing, testing.
So that's kind of where you've got to walk the line of trying to get the tone right and getting enough gain before feedback. That's what we're doing with these EQ points, is getting enough input level that where we can push it through the system before it starts to ring. That make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Nice. Feel pretty good?
No, right now you have this at 40. Would we want to look at maybe increasing that since it's a microphone?
I mean,
You
he's
were talking-
speaking. Usually when people speak, they speak a little faster
Faster
than what
than
they
they
would if they were singing,
singing.
right?
Okay.
They're not usually holding notes.
Gotcha. So on a microphone
So-
that you're speaking in, you would want to lower.
Right. Speakers
Faster release.
and rappers.
Okay,
You know,
that makes
for all
sense.
the rappers in Lee Summit that are coming to our church.
Yes.
Yep.
Amen. Come on.
Try it. Go one more time,
You got it?
Cyprian.
Test 1, 2, 3, 4. Test, test, test.
Go to your
Hello.
go to your right.
Over here?
Yeah.
Hello, hello. Test, 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 test. 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, in the spot right here. Hello.
Yeah.
It's a little bit.
Yeah. There's the
So we might move that
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Hello, hello, hello.
Split the difference there.
Test, 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 test.
Make this one a little
Test.
wider.
Test, test, test.
Or we might roll up the high pass filter.
Hello, 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 hello. Testing 1, 2,
You know-
3. Oh, there you go.
Speech intelligibility happens between 300 and 3K. You know, like that's
Test
the telephone
1, 2,
sound.
3, 4.
But you can hear what
1,
people
2,
are saying
3,
over the telephone. So
1,
you can roll that high
2,
pass filter up pretty far on a speaking mic.
And that's what I've done
Hello,
on his.
hello.
Is typically I do have the high pass filter pretty
Yeah.
high.
So let's,
And that also helps with the echo. I've noticed is the echoey. If you ever hear Pastor Allen being very echoey,
That's
feedback,
true.
sometimes I've increased the high pass filter on that.
Test, 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 test.
All right, go back to your spot and get real loud again.
Right here or right there?
Right over there, yeah.
Test 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Hello, hello.
let's walk out here and see what's
Test, test, test. Hello. Gonna preach on Sunday. No, not me. AJ's gonna preach on Sunday because he came in clutch with his batteries. Test, test, test. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hello, hello, hello.
And you might just be hearing the room.
Hello, 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 hello. Test, 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 test. Sounds pretty good now. Sounds good for here. Probably sounds really different from where you're at. It's pretty echoey up here. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Echoey up front. Test 1, 2. Yeah. I don't even think the speakers are adjusted. Just kind of go right over the first few rows, huh? Test, 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 test. Hello.
Yep.
Sounds good.
You clean the church.
Nice. They knew you'd come
Very
back.
honest person. Somebody that's not putting the water bottles.
It was gonna be in the kitchen.
All right. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We did.
You got food for thought, so now next time you'll come back with lots of questions. And
What do these guys do?
so those are the sends, the bus sends. So you can send signals to an effects channel. And so you can send all your vocals to reverb, all your vocals to delay. You can send all your drums to a reverb, or if you wanted to submix something, say they just wanted to have only drums in the, like a mix of all the drums in the monitor mixer. You could mix down all 6 channels to a stereo pair that goes up there for their monitor mix. Or if you had a monitor wedge, that's how you would use that to get the level there.
So we wouldn't mess with that, probably.
I don't think we have any reason to mess with that other than, you know, effects and if you want to put reverb on something. Now, one thing I
We
did
have
find
verbs
when
on
I
the
walked
drums,
in,
and we have verbs on the drums, and we have sound effects on the instruments and vocal effects.
one thing I found when I came in here earlier, this might be on everybody's scene or nobody's scene, is that the drums were also assigned to the drum reverb return channel, at VCA. So when you turn down the drum reverb, you also turn down the drums themselves.
I've noticed that, yeah.
So to change that, to change what's assigned to one of these DCA groups, you hold down select, and then you can change what's assigned to that. So what it was these were all assigned to the drum verb DCA. So whenever you turn down the drum verb, you also turn down the drums. There was no way to independently control those. So
Can you
Watch out
explain
for that.
what the drum? Because I kind of think they're the same-ish thing because it would do that.
Because it would do that, right.
What,
So these are all remote controls, right? You couldn't patch in a compressor on your remote control at home for your TV. So these are just remote controls of the fader levels over here. So when something's assigned to this, right, you hit select and it's assigned to it, whatever change this fader is at, essentially changes all those faders at the same level.
What does the drums verb do?
This has reverb, so there's reverb sent from the drums through one of these bus sends to an effect in the effects rack. Go over here. I don't know which one it is, but we'll see. Drums verb is bus 13, so that is this one, number 1. So that's our drum reverb. It's sent to the drum reverb through bus. So if we've got our snare drum sent to bus 13, right? Number 1 on 13 is 13. It's sent from there to this effects rack. From this effects rack, its output comes back to effects returns. And it comes back on these 2 faders here on this layer. So this is drums verb. That drums verb is assigned to this.
So if these are down, this wouldn't even matter.
Right.
I wonder if those.
No, if you. No, I'm sorry.
Maybe it's on the send. But
It's not.
can't be.
It's a fries that only doing one at a time.
Well, it's not even able to select it for some reason.
Yeah.
So maybe this is, oh wait, sorry, we're on the bus layer. This happens often on the
Oh,
drum
okay,
consoles.
okay.
If we were on the drums
There
verb,
you go. Now they're
now
there.
you can see that it's assigned
Gotcha.
to that DCA. Does that make sense?
So only the snare has the reverb? Is that what you just showed me?
Well, I showed you that it definitely is on the reverb, but let's see what is assigned to it. If we sends on fader, it's all the drums with a little less kick, which is typical.
Okay.
So if we hit sends on fader, basically puts on here what's going to this send, as opposed to what's going to the master fader.
That's
So
what
that,
I was,
and it flashes to let you know, like, hey, if you just push this up, you're going to get more reverb, you're not going to get more level.
and what I was showing them, when I hit sends on fader and I select the instrument mix, this is what basically is going through in their ears for
Right.
like the worship leader.
Right, the worship leader's instrument
Yeah.
is, this week, it is the guitar. If on another week you're leading from keys, you would turn this down and turn that up. Then the keyboard would be going into worship leader mix. Does that make sense? And always go back from sends on fader so you don't trip yourself up.
Cool.
All right.
That's awesome.
Well, great work, everybody. Thank you for being the bridge that carries the message from the messengers to the people.
Thanks for showing us.
I appreciate you guys.
So how much percent did you show us of all there is to learn? Is that like 5%?
Well, for me to know the answer to that, I would have to know everything there is to learn.
How much is that percentage of James's knowledge?
Half of one.
Probably. But it just takes time to absorb.
Oh yeah, no.
It's 0.5%.
As a volunteer who does this once a month on Sundays, I don't
Right.
think we'll ever get there. But no, this is awesome though. It's very
Yeah.
helpful.
Well, it's,
Yeah, it took a while when I first started coming back here because we had 4 people, so it was like, do it once and then not come back for 4 weeks. And it was like, you know,
What do I
like trying
do
to
again?
relearn what you just learned from a month ago.
Yeah.
I've
It
done
took
this
a while.
before, but I don't remember.
You know, lately, people tend to gather right here and, you know, the security guys want to come over and start talking to you like, dude, we're getting ready to start coming. And last week, or last time I did it, Jonathan comes over, he goes, it was like literally like 10, 9, you know, I'm looking at Simran and he's like, you know, he's moving around and I'm like, I just started hitting record on stuff because I wasn't going to have time to start doing it. So it recorded you early, like
I
you're
saw
up there
that.
doing stuff. And Jonathan's sitting here talking to me, you know, we've had some problems, you know, it sounds like it's not fading in from the rate or the, you know, worship songs before you start, like there's a gap there, you know, you think maybe we can try and work on that? And then it's like go time. And I'm like, I'm turning everything up and he's like, well, should we do this? And he starts messing with the, you know, the radio or the Spotify. And I'm going, oh my gosh. So you guys are up there playing and the instruments was turned all the way down. So it's like you can just hear acoustics. I'm like, yeah, Jordan was running around here like, dude, something's going on. And Jonathan just walked away. And Jordan got right here, he goes, okay. And then he turned around because I just turned it up. Like, ah, man.
The ultimate distraction.
Yeah, well, it's just like, you know,
That's,
need a box.
Well, we used to be up on a platform.
yeah. You should
What
just
made
put,
you guys
like,
take
some
it down?
headphones. I think it just took up a bunch of space.
I mean, if you think the bass was bad here, it was worse when it was up in that platform.
It
Really?
Yeah.
sounds better down here.
Yeah.
But it sounds better just for us, though. Right?
Yeah.
Well,
You're the one that's trying to listen
It
to
sound
adjust
back in here, like
anyway.
when we were up, everything was a lot more dead.
Really?
you know how when we went down in the front, it got more muffled because you're not having those high frequency
Yeah.
drivers staring at you.
It was the same.
It was the same thing back here, but with what this back wall was doing.
Really?
So I know one guy that came in here and adjusted EQ in the room and had the highs like cranked all the way up on the system processor because he couldn't, you know, here he was like trying to make it sound good from sitting there in the booth. But then out here it's like, you know, just stabbing you.
And by the way, sometimes when someone says, hey, it's too loud, turn it down, it might not be because it's too loud, it might be
Where
because of the
they're sitting.
frequency, where they're sitting in the frequency that it's hitting them at.
Yeah.
It's maybe not a volume thing, it's just,
So
Frequency.
homework for you guys. There's a website called Sound Gym.
Sound Jim.
It's soundgym.co. I guess they're too
That's
cool for the M.
.io.
Yeah. So soundgym.co, you can sign up for a free account and play these like EQ games. Where it will play you a signal and you can turn the EQ on and off, and then you have to guess